I remember the day vividly. Mark, with his slicked back hair and a smirk that seemed permanently etched on his face, sauntered into the conference room. He was always practicing that look, probably while brushing his teeth with some artisanal toothpaste and an unhealthy dose of self-importance. The room fell silent, a suffocating vacuum of no air, no noise, just the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant echo of someone's dignity being publicly incinerated. I sat motionless, my spine as straight as steel rebar, while the rest of the department tried to pretend they hadn't just witnessed a live beheading. No one coughed. No one blinked. The quarterly update slides froze on screen behind Mark's bobblehead, half hidden by a stack of overpriced branded notebooks he insisted the company order to boost creative synergy. "This is a new era," he continued, pacing like a TED Talk guru. "We need agile thinkers, not relics of outdated systems." Effective immediately, Aurora Vance is no longer with the company. No one clapped. They just existed, or pretended to. Sarah from HR suddenly found her coffee very interesting. David, the lead engineer, stared straight ahead, his jaw twitching like he wanted to say something, but remembered the last poor soul who stood up to Mark got reassigned to AI, chatbot onboarding for squirrels. I didn't flinch. I didn't stand. I didn't sputter, plead, or perform the shocked. How could you? People always expect in these public purgings. Instead, I blinked slowly, almost sympathetically, like I was watching a child proudly eat a crayon and announce it was pizza. Mark cleared his throat, sensing the absence of drama wasn't the climax he imagined. "You'll be escorted out by security following this meeting. Your access will be revoked by end of day." I raised my phone, my thumb flicking the screen without a word. A soft chime popped into the air like a trigger pulled. My calendar read, "Federal Briefing, 11:30 a.m. Location, Secure Conference Room 4. Sea-Level 2 clearance required. Attendees: Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, Colonel Davies, Aurora Vance." For the briefest second, something in my eyes flickered. Not panic, not shame, but something cooler, heavier. The kind of calm a bomb squad tech wears right before snipping a red wire. I stood slowly, deliberately, gathered my portfolio, not a single paperclip out of place. My badge was still clipped to my blazer, not one button misaligned. I was immaculate, as always. "Am I allowed to collect my personal items?" I asked quietly. Mark blinked, thrown off. "Yes, of course. Someone from HR." "No need," I said. "I'm capable." I turned, my low heels tapping against the tile like a metronome measuring the beat of everyone else's guilt. When I reached the door, I stopped, my ear tilted slightly, just enough to catch Mark in my peripheral. "You should really double-check who has clearance for which floors before throwing your little tantrum, Mark." Then I left. Just like that, the moment the door shut behind me, the room finally breathed again. Shallow, nervous gulps. No one dared whisper, but everyone thought the same thing. What the hell just happened? Mark, looking more confused than victorious, mumbled something about, "Let's keep moving." But the presentation was already dead. My absence was a crater. Out in the hallway, I paused only once, just long enough to glance at my phone again. 11:11 a.m. Plenty of time to make it to the lobby. They'd be arriving any minute, and they wouldn't be asking for Mark. The elevator chimed like a church bell for the doomed, and I stepped out into the sterile, over-perfumed lobby. Fake peace lilies and fingerprint-smudged planters pretended to breathe life into a building that was hemorrhaging competence. My box was small. One framed photo of my dog, a 1999 Defense Systems mug with a chipped lip, and a manila folder containing exactly one document, a signed clearance log. I didn't linger, didn't weep at the sight of the front desk, didn't give the security cameras the satisfaction of catching emotion. My feet moved steady and hurried, like someone headed into surgery, just not the one being cut open. At 11:26, right on the dot, two figures emerged from the revolving doors, one in the crisp blue of the U.S. Navy, the other in the starched olive of the U.S. Army. No smiles, no pleasantries, no briefcases, just eyes like sonar and posture like steel beams. The receptionist, a young woman with a pink scrunchie and an Ask Me About Our Culture Code button, froze mid-scroll through some influencer's salad pic on Instagram. Mark was already there, of course. He was puffed up like a rooster on caffeine, arms spread like he'd summoned them through sheer vision board manifestation. His voice rang out too loud in the glass box of a lobby, rehearsed and tone-deaf. "Gentlemen, welcome to Tech Solutions. Mark Harrison, Director of Strategy and Integration. We are so honored to have..." "Where is Aurora Vance?" The Army officer cut him off, flat, not blinking. Mark's smile hiccuped, but didn't die. "Ah, yes, Aurora. Unfortunately, she's recently transitioned out of the company, but no worries, I've been fully briefed." The Navy man turned to the receptionist. "Is Aurora Vance on site?" Before the poor girl could answer, I stepped forward, box under one arm, blazer still crisp. "They're here for me," I said, my voice calm as a weather app. "They won't brief anyone without me." Mark turned like a cartoon villain, realizing the bomb had been under his chair all along. "Aurora, let's not make a scene." "This isn't a scene," I said. "This is protocol. You'd know that if you'd read anything besides Fast Company blog posts." The Navy officer stepped beside me like a shadow. "Miss Vance, if you're ready." "I am." They didn't wait, flanked me like a presidential detail, and walked toward the restricted corridor. The security panel blinked red at Mark, who tried to follow. I didn't even look back as I passed my badge over the sensor. Green light, door unlocked. I stepped through. Mark stood outside, flapping like a dad locked out of a Tesla he didn't know how to start. "Wait, hold on. She's not an employee anymore. She can't have access." From inside, I turned, finally meeting his eyes through the glass. "I am the sole point of contact for Project Sentinel," I said calmly. "The only one with Level 2 clearance. You terminated that access when you fired me. Then to the officers, if you'd like to reschedule the briefing under a different employer, I'm open to options." The Army officer's mouth didn't move, but his eyebrow twitched just enough to suggest interest. Mark's color faded into the same beige as the lobby tiles. The door hissed shut between us. On the other side, the military officials guided me into a secure elevator that required a thumbprint and retina scan. As the lift began its quiet descent into the sublevels where firewalls weren't just metaphorical, I finally let my lips curl, just barely. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet, not with the humiliation still drying on my skin like cold sweat. But somewhere between the second and third subfloors, a flicker of something woke up. Cold satisfaction, and the realization that the clock had just started ticking for Mark Harrison. Upstairs, in Conference Room B, the one with the ridiculous LED collaboration halo that Mark insisted on installing to boost creative morale, chaos blossomed like mold in a forgotten lunchbox. The screen was blank. The federal briefing deck hadn't launched. The projector refused access. A black window blinked. Access denied. User not authorized. Mark tapped the keyboard harder, as if brute force could outwit government encryption. His jaw was clenched, so tight the vein in his temple looked like it was about to file a complaint. Behind him, the senior systems analyst whispered into her headset, then looked up, pale. "Sir, the main interface won't initialize. Their team says you're not recognized in the contract database." Mark spun on her. "What? It's impossible. I'm the acting director." "Doesn't matter," said David from DevOps, arms folded, his voice barely hiding the contempt he'd kept under wraps since Mark's arrival. "The access tree is tied to security clearances, not job titles. Aurora was the root node. You terminated her without a transfer or override." Mark's eyes scanned the room like a man searching for a fire exit in a submarine. Okay, call her. Just call her. Get her back up here. I'll fix this. He pulled out his phone, smacking the screen like it owed him loyalty. The dial tone rang once, twice, 3 times. I saw the call. My phone lit up on the secure conference table beside my government-issued folder. I didn't even glance at it. The Army officer, Colonel Davies, looked over mildly. Need to take that? No, I said, my voice even, just noise. I let it ring. Then I silenced it. Upstairs, Mark was still gripping his phone like he was threatening it into submission. She didn't pick up. She'll call back. She has to. No one in the room agreed out loud, but a quiet current began to move through the team, like wind shifting before a storm. Sarah from HR, who'd stayed silent for years under 3 regimes of managers, spoke first. Did you seriously fire the only person with federal clearance before a Pentagon-level briefing? Mark scoffed. Insubordinate, resistant to change. We're integrating AI systems. We don't need outdated manual protocols. She built those protocols, said David flatly, from scratch, before you even learned what a zero-trust model was. Yeah, someone else muttered. Did she write the whole logic spine for Project Sentinel in, 2016? A murmur spread like spilled coffee under a conference table. Heads nodding, side eyes, quiet, deliberate, scrolling through LinkedIn profiles. My face glowed softly from multiple screens. One particularly bold intern whispered to another. I heard she was on a first-name basis with someone from Homeland Security. Mark tried to rally, slamming his hand on the table just loud enough to sound desperate. Look, she's gone. We need to move forward. David, spin up the alternate environment. We'll route around her. David didn't move. Environments on an encrypted subnet. Access permissions haven't been updated in months, and the passphrase is still set by Aurora. Mark's throat worked like he was swallowing a dry screw. Well, brute force it, he snapped. You brute force a federal contract, and you'll be explaining that to a military tribunal. Sarah said. They'll come in here with men in suits and tape off the building. You'll be in the parking lot explaining data tampering to a guy named Agent Ross. Silence fell again. This time, thicker, hotter. No one was smiling. Not anymore. Mark turned back to the screen. The words hadn't changed. Access denied. User not authorized. Somewhere deep beneath the floor, I was in the middle of a quiet, orderly conversation with Lieutenant Commander Reynolds and Colonel Davies. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't venting. I was discussing policy continuity, mission assurance, and contractor transition pathways. My voice remained steady, hands still, but inside, a slow pressure was releasing. Not triumph, not yet, just validation. Upstairs, my team, the ones I had mentored, fought for during budget cuts, covered for when deadlines slipped, were putting it together. They weren't dumb. They were engineers, and now they were seeing Mark for what he was. A decorative wrecking ball in expensive shoes. The realization had begun. The unraveling wouldn't be far behind. By 4:00 p.m., Mark was pacing through the executive wing like a man with a fire alarm strapped to his ego. He'd already called legal twice, screamed at HR for procedural overreach, tried bribing David with stock options that hadn't even vested, but nothing was moving. Every path forward slammed face first into a digital wall I had constructed years ago, back when I was quietly designing a skeleton key no one else knew existed. Mark didn't know that Project Sentinel's infrastructure wasn't just protected by clearance levels. I had layered it like an onion dipped in acid, embedded firewalls coded in pre-compiled scripts, dependency chains only I knew how to untangle, and a second-phase authentication system that referenced a physical token which was currently locked in a biometric safe 3 stories underground and would self-wipe if tampered with. Mark naturally tried to fast-track a new clearance. He called in a favor with a defense contractor friend from college who owed him for keeping quiet about a Vegas bachelor party in 2018. Didn't matter. Request denied. The response from the Department of Defense was so sterile it practically hissed. Subject: Harrison, Mark, is not recognized under current program authorizations. All credential elevation requests for Project Sentinel must be routed through the existing primary contractor of record, Vance, Aurora M. Mark threw his phone against a whiteboard. Downstairs, in the cool hush of Sub-Level 3, I sat across from Lieutenant Commander Reynolds in a secure debriefing suite. The room was minimalist: steel table, 2 chairs, glass of water untouched, one flickering fluorescent overhead that made no apology for the buzz. "Miss Vance," he said, folding his hands on the table. "You're aware the contract allows for reassignment of assets if the project's operational continuity is at risk?" "I'm aware," I replied. "There's also language buried in Appendix G about continuity pathways outside of employer custody." I didn't flinch. "You're saying I'm the asset, not the company?" Reynolds gave the tiniest nod. "We don't care where you sit, Miss Vance. We care that Sentinel works. We care that no one in Beijing or Moscow gets their hands on it." I leaned back, quietly absorbing the offer underneath the euphemism. "You're suggesting I walk," I said. "I'm saying if you did, there'd be someone in D.C. ready to hold the door open." I didn't answer. Not yet, because power wasn't in grabbing the first life raft. It was in watching everyone else panic about whether you built the boat. By the time I returned home that evening, my inbox was already molting with invitations. Quick chat about strategic systems roles. "Would love to get coffee. Discreetly, of course. We heard you're making moves. We'd like to be part of that conversation." Not one of them mentioned Mark. They didn't need to. I opened a bottle of wine, just one glass. I wasn't celebrating yet. Instead, I pulled out my old moleskin notebook, one with faded graphite diagrams and coffee stains from years of midnight war rooms and lost weekends. I turned to the section labeled Post-Tech Solutions Exit Protocol. The plan was old, but not dead. I updated 3 pages, mapped out a contact tree, highlighted names I could trust, people who didn't flinch when things got classified, engineers who didn't chase stock valuations or Slack emojis. I smiled at the name of one in particular, Clara, a former protege, now 3 years deep at a cyber defense firm that didn't advertise its Pentagon ties, but definitely had them. I picked up my phone and tapped a message. "Still looking to build something clean, something quiet?" The reply came 2 minutes later. "Hell yes. When do we start?" I sat back, exhaled slowly, and looked out the window as dusk settled over the city like a secret no one had earned yet. I wasn't just moving on, I was setting the table, and I was choosing the menu. Mark, he was still upstairs, trying to log into a system that now recognized him as background noise. By the end of the week, the walls at Tech Solutions weren't just cracking, they were sweating. Missed deadlines began piling up like soggy Post-it notes in a flood. An AI module, Mark had promised, would revolutionize operational throughput, failed its second integration test in a spectacular implosion that caused the test server to crash and spit out nothing but ASCII skulls. No one could explain it, but rumor had it the codebase had hard-coded references to deprecated endpoints, ones that had been migrated under my documentation, now mysteriously missing from the shared drive. Mark blamed legacy dependencies. The engineers blamed Mark. Project managers started whispering phrases like spiraling bottleneck and failure cascade in meetings. No one made eye contact. Sarah from HR updated her resume in plain sight. Then came the first escalation email from the federal liaison. Not panicked, not hostile, just disappointed. It requested urgent clarification on workflow adjustments post-asset transition and asked why Tech Solutions had not yet submitted the mandatory Phase 2 security audit packet. Mark, to no one's surprise, hadn't even known there was a Phase 2 packet. I had always submitted it quietly, on time, in triplicate. The board called an emergency strategy huddle. They called it a vision sync, but everyone knew it was just damage control with muffins. It didn't help. The marketing lead, who'd never once met me but had inherited a cloud of secondhand reverence, slipped up during a team sync and said, "We're 3 weeks behind because someone fired the person holding the nuclear codes." No one laughed, not even Mark. Then the whispers started, quiet, paranoid, dangerous. Why was she fired? I heard she pushed back on the AI rollout. No, she flagged security issues, and Mark didn't like being challenged. She had dinner with someone from the Pentagon last year. Not like a Pentagon official, like a top-level one. She had an old-school badge, someone else murmured, like metal with a chip in it. I didn't need to fan the flames. They were doing fine on their own. But I wasn't idle either. I watched from a distance, LinkedIn activity, internal leaks from trusted contacts, screenshots forwarded anonymously. One from David simply read, "They're asking questions now. Loud ones." That Friday night, 9:17 p.m., Clara, the same mentee I texted days earlier, got pulled into a confidential alignment chat with the board. It was in conference room D, where they held sensitive partner negotiations and rarely brought anyone under director level. Clara was 29, a senior engineer, not an executive, not yet. They asked her what I really did, what I worked on, why I had clearance levels Mark couldn't access, why the system post-firing was behaving like a grieving machine, functional but moody, locking files without warning, delaying syncs, refusing new integrations. They wanted context. Clara gave them a careful, quiet truth. Aurora didn't just run the contract. She was the contract. She built Sentinel's architecture on protocols no one else could even explain without a map and a thesaurus. She didn't write manuals because she was the manual. The board sat frozen. Why didn't she document more thoroughly? One asked. She did, Clara said, in the private documentation vault, the one you need biometric clearance for. And you're saying we can't access it? I'm saying you need Aurora's fingerprint and retinal scan, or an executive override key from the Pentagon. That one landed hard. Afterward, Clara texted me 3 words. They're unraveling fast. I read it in bed, in sweatpants, with my dog snoring at my feet and a half-drunk cup of green tea by the lamp. I allowed myself a small smile, not smug, just vindicated. I typed back, "Let them," because I wasn't done yet, not even close. Monday started with a bang, but not the celebratory kind, not a champagne pop, more like a claymore mine to the gut of Tech Solutions' executive suite. At 8:42 a.m., the company's general counsel received a certified letter, not an email, not a ping, not a whisper from some junior analyst, but a physical envelope, hand-delivered, with a federal seal and an embedded verification chip on the flap. When they cracked it open in the presence of 2 witnesses and a trembling HR rep, the first line read, "Formal notice of project lead non-compliance." By 9:06, the CFO had the letter on his desk. By 9:15, he was in Mark's glass-walled office, the kind with the fake bonsai tree and a whiteboard that still had "Disrupt Legacy Thinking" scribbled on it from his first week. "You need to tell me right now," the CFO said, his voice flat as asphalt. "The Department of Defense believes Aurora Vance is still the active project lead on Project Sentinel." Mark leaned back in his chair like a man hoping posture could make up for competence. "That must be a clerical error. We submitted new role assignments last week. They bounced them twice. Then legal must have. Legal hasn't even touched it because the system won't allow them to. It's not just about log in, Mark. Her name is burned into the contract metadata." Mark opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "She didn't leave clean, okay? She left with access keys she shouldn't have had." "You mean the keys she generated because she was the only one authorized to do so for 7 years? Mark blinked. The CFO didn't. "Do you have any idea?" He continued slowly now, as if talking to a particularly stubborn toaster. "What happens when we're found non-compliant on a $300 million federal contract? You know how fast blacklisting happens in this space? Do you understand how little mercy Washington has for companies that screw with defense architecture?" Mark stood, gesturing wide like a man drowning in his own pitch deck. "She's orchestrating this. She's undermining us. She hasn't said a word to the press. She hasn't even replied to our retraction letters. You fired her in front of her team. She just walked out the door." The CFO leaned in. Then the Pentagon followed her. By lunch, the boardroom smelled like fear, masked with cinnamon air freshener. Directors who hadn't spoken up in months were now very interested in process transparency and workflow stability. Fingers started pointing. Legal blamed ops. Ops blamed Mark. Mark blamed old culture rot. Nobody blamed me because I wasn't there. I was across town in a sunlit cafe, sipping espresso with my laptop open to a quiet LinkedIn update. Aurora M. Vance, Advisor, Federal Systems Strategy Group. No fanfare, no headline post, just a new line on a profile, clean and cold as a scalpel. The moment it went live, phones started buzzing. Not mine, theirs. Government contacts, defense consultants, a few panicked recruiters who realized too late they should have reached out before their competitors did. Back at Tech Solutions, Clara saw it first. She texted David. "Check LinkedIn." "She moved," David replied with one word. The CFO made a private call to a risk mitigation firm. One of the directors asked if they should disclose the inquiry to investors now or wait for the next quarterly. The general counsel opened a Google Doc titled Board Response Plan, Emergency Draft. Mark, meanwhile, sat alone in his office, staring at his phone, scrolling through my profile again and again. My face didn't gloat, my headline didn't accuse, but it burned. Advisor to Federal Systems Strategy Group. In defense circles, that was the equivalent of God's unlisted number. He finally looked up and saw the reflection of himself in the glass. A man still pretending he had leverage while the entire building around him was sinking into the bedrock I had once reinforced with my bare hands. I didn't smile. I did close my laptop, finish my espresso, and walk out the cafe with the sun on my back like a woman who'd already written the last page and mailed it to the people who thought they'd stolen her pen. The invitation came on a Thursday, not via email, not even through my new government-side employer. It arrived by courier, hand-delivered in a matte black envelope with a return address that simply read 237, the E-ring, Pentagon. Inside, a single cream card stock page embossed with an eagle. "We request your presence for a closed-door strategy session concerning Project Sentinel. Your insights remain critical to national continuity. Friday, 1400 hours, room 5E741. No frills, no ask, just expectation." I didn't need to call anyone to ask if it was real. I knew the tone, the cadence. It wasn't an invitation. It was gravity. Next morning, I wore navy, not black. Black meant war. Navy meant command. My heels clicked like punctuation down the marble Pentagon halls, flanked by security who didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't ask for ID. I was in the system, deeper than Mark ever dreamed of being. The room was nothing like Tech Solutions boardrooms. No glass, no marketing slogans, just wood-paneled silence. 4-star brass, 2 men from the Office of Net Assessment who looked like they'd survived 4 presidential administrations without changing their neckties. They didn't flatter me. They didn't apologize. "Miss Vance," one said, his hands folded like stone, "we believe you're the only person who understands the full operational intent of Sentinel. You built it with enough abstraction that even we can't reverse engineer parts of the logic spine." The other added, "That's not a criticism. It's impressive." I inclined my head slightly. "I didn't build it for show. I built it for defense. We want you to finish what you started," the first one said. "From here, under us. No red tape, no legacy bureaucracy. We'll handle the contractor transitions." I folded my hands. "What happens to Tech Solutions?" A pause. A breath. "If they comply, they'll be permitted to supply Tier 3 support. If they resist, terminate the entire engagement and blacklist them from future contracts." I didn't blink. "And Mark?" A longer pause. "Your replacement will not be him," came the reply. No malice, no fanfare, just a subtle shifting of tectonic plates. Meanwhile, back in Ohio, Mark stood in front of a generic Tech Solutions step-and-repeat banner, lying through his capped teeth to a local business news outlet. "We're in a period of transformation," he said, nodding at his own words like a bobblehead in heat. "Legacy systems often require disruption. The Pentagon recognizes our innovation, and we're aligned on all fronts." The reporter, fresh out of grad school, didn't press him, but even he could see the sweat beading at Mark's hairline. Across LinkedIn, a different story was writing itself. Industry recruiters were comparing my advisory move to a hostile corporate buyout. Anonymous sources leaked that the Department of Defense had flagged Tech Solutions as non-compliant, pending remediation. A respected tech blog ran the headline, "Vance's Flight: How Tech Solutions Star Engineer Became the Pentagon's Power Move." By the time the Tech Solutions Board received the official notice of potential contract termination, stamped and signed by a deputy undersecretary, Mark was already on the phone with PR, spinning words like pivotal moment and strategic inflection. The board wasn't buying anymore. They were fielding calls from institutional investors. They were reviewing indemnity clauses. They were emailing my former team, one by one, asking if anyone else still had access to what I had locked behind 6 layers of cryptographic misdirection. They were realizing too late that there wasn't a fix. There was only me. I, now back in my DC suite overlooking the Anacostia River, didn't revel in any of it. No dancing on graves, no angry monologues into the mirror. Just silence, wine, and the knowledge that I hadn't needed revenge. I just stood still while the tide shifted, and now everyone else was drowning in the wake I left behind. The email from Tech Solutions came at 6:03 a.m. on a Sunday. Subject line, "Reinstatement Proposal. Urgent. Sender, Chairman at Tech Solutions Corp." It was short, as if the shame of groveling made the fingers behind it tremble. "Aurora, in light of recent developments, the Board of Directors formally requests your return in a consulting capacity, with full access restored and compensation aligned with the strategic importance of your contributions. We would be grateful for a conversation at your earliest convenience. Respectfully, Alan F. Cordell, Chairman, Tech Solutions Technologies." I didn't respond immediately. I finished my walk with the dog, refilled his bowl, watered my plants. The house was still, sunlight creeping across the kitchen tile like a soft admission that time was on my side now. At 8:11 a.m., I replied, "Dear Mr. Cordell, I appreciate the gesture. At this time, I must respectfully decline. I've accepted another position. Wishing you clarity in the days ahead. A.M. Vance." I hit send. Exactly 17 minutes later, the boardroom at Tech Solutions was in full panic. Mark was on mute during the Zoom call, pretending to jot notes while the rest of the directors took turns glaring at their own reflections. Then came the blow they weren't prepared for. A formal call. No paper this time. Just the clear voice of Lieutenant Commander Reynolds over speakerphone. "This is your final compliance advisory," he said, calm as a guillotine. "Project Sentinel is a national security asset. If Aurora Vance is not reinstated immediately, and Mr. Harrison not removed from all supervisory functions, we will nullify the existing contract and reassign the program to alternate custodians." "What? What does reassignment entail?" one of the directors stammered. "It means we take the project, your reputation, and your future in defense contracting," Reynolds said, "and we leave you with press releases and subpoenas." The call ended. No one moved for a full 10 seconds. Then the chairman turned to Mark. "You need to resign." Mark stood slowly, like a man realizing the only thing left in the room was gravity. "You can't seriously be effective immediately. I built this roadmap." "You needed disruption," you said. "You disrupted us into federal blacklisting," the CFO snapped. "We don't need disruption. We need to not go to prison." Mark's badge was deactivated before he hit the parking garage. At my new office, technically a satellite advisory suite leased by a firm no one could find listed in any commercial registry. I stood overlooking the Anacostia River, watching the water slide past like time shaking off old names. I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel anything, really, just complete. The door opened behind me. Clara stepped in, followed by David and Sarah, my people, ones who knew the systems not from flowcharts, but from late nights and caffeine and long-haul trust. "Everyone signed," Clara said. "NDAs, new contracts. We're officially live. Welcome to the new ecosystem." "Aurora," I said, turning. Clara grinned. "You sure you don't want to call it Sentinel-2? I shook my head. "We're not fixing what they broke. We're building something they'll never touch." I glanced at the secure screen behind me. An internal tracker pinged. 10 systems migrated. 0 errors. Full continuity. This wasn't just control. It was independence. Tech Solutions had begged. The Pentagon had demanded. My team had followed, not out of obligation, but loyalty. And I had delivered them somewhere no one could fire them from ever again. I, Aurora Vance, no longer worked in the shadow of men like Mark. I worked above them, out of reach, out of sight, and with a keycard that didn't need explaining. A press release hit the wires at 10 o'clock a.m. sharp. Polished, bland, forgettable by design. Tech Solutions Technologies announces a strategic leadership realignment. Effective immediately, Director of Strategy Mark Harrison will be stepping back due to unforeseen health concerns. The board has appointed interim leadership to guide Tech Solutions through its next phase of innovation and compliance. No mention of federal threats, no hint of how close they came to implosion. Just a polite obituary for a man who still thought spreadsheets could outmaneuver protocol. Inside Tech Solutions, no one believed the health story. Mark's office had been cleared before sunrise, his nameplate quietly scraped from the glass. No farewell email, no catered goodbye, just a note taped to the door. Under transition, do not disturb. The board met in hushed tones. No anger, just exhaustion. They weren't rebuilding. They were begging the world not to notice the cracks in their facade were actually holes punched clean through by arrogance. Far from the corporate mausoleum, deep within a black site federal compound that didn't appear on GPS, I walked through a reinforced checkpoint wearing a crisp navy blazer and a white plastic badge clipped to my lapel. It read simply, Visitor, OLVEL2. Vance, A. Escorted. Full clearance. Pre-approved. The guards didn't stop me, nodded. One of them, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, gave a rare half-smile. "You know you don't need that badge anymore," he said. I glanced down at it, the word visitor stark against my breast pocket. "Not for them," I replied. "But it's a nice reminder." The hum of classified work surrounded me. Servers with no brands, screens with no logos, personnel who never asked for last names. This wasn't a job anymore. It was architecture. It was war conducted in silence. I passed through 3 more biometric doors and came to a long hallway lined with glass conference rooms. Inside the one at the end, room 7E, sat a familiar table newly occupied by strangers. At the head of the table, a young woman in a Tech Solutions badge, her posture stiff with panic. Next to her, a man in a dark gray suit, a federal contractor likely auditing them into a corner. Across from them, someone knew Mark's replacement, an appointee, crisp, nervous, trying not to sweat through his collar. As I entered frame, but I didn't walk into the room. I passed it, glanced in just enough to catch eyes. The new director of strategy froze, then gave a twitchy smile. Behind him, on the wall screen, the architecture map of Project Sentinel glowed, annotated, modified, but unmistakably mine. I didn't break stride. I reached the far wall, turned a corner, and vanished down the restricted corridor. I had another meeting in 4 minutes, a real one that mattered. And as the doors hissed shut behind me, The badge on my blazer caught the overhead light one last time. Visitor. As if this place, this role, this quiet empire I'd orchestrated from ruin was still something I was just passing through. I didn't burn the bridge. I bought the whole damn river, and now I was upstream, rerouting the current. The lesson here is clear. True competence and integrity will always prevail over arrogance and superficiality. When you build something with dedication and foresight, your contributions become indispensable, and those who attempt to undermine them will ultimately face the consequences of their own short-sightedness. This story reminds us that even in the face of public humiliation and professional betrayal, maintaining your calm, knowing your worth, and having a long-term vision can lead to not just vindication, but to building something far greater and more secure than what was lost. Always invest in your skills, cultivate strong relationships, and trust that your true value will shine through, even when others try to dim your light.